Beg your pardon? Meredith, who is this coarse person with the foreign accent?
I have several friends who have used microdoses of psychedelics to work on some healthcare issues. They have reported rapid and very good results. So I think there is some good that can be done by exploring that avenue of treatment. You know, none of us really like that toxic rhetoric. In fact, I did a book tour with my book, and the number one thing people said they wanted changed at the national level was they're tired of the toxic rhetoric leading to nothing getting done. People are really sick of this unhealthy dialogue. They really are deeply sick of it.
Hey, Denny LaVe. Can we say right away, welcome, and cool beard and cool name. What's the story behind both?
So the story behind the name, actually, we're not entirely certain. We think it's French Basque. That's one of the options. Is it's French Basque. We have some ancestors that immigrated to America through New Orleans, and we think that they somehow changed the name and ended up with LaVe. But there's also a part of the family tree that points to it. It could actually be a changing of the last name Levi, to avoid some anti-Semitism in Colorado 100 years ago. So not entirely sure about that. But then the beard, man, I've had a beard most of my adult life. It's just always been neatly trimmed and well-groomed. And so, I don't know, 3.5 years ago, I decided I was going to shave it off and see who was under there. And shaving every day got old after about a week. So then I thought, I'm just going to grow it out. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to see what it looks like if I grow it out long. And I really like the look. And sometimes I braid it. Sometimes I just kind of bunch it up. But, it's a good look. It's very memorable. People like it. So sticking with it.
Yeah. It very much goes with your image of the everyman. So you're running for Senate now, is that right?
That's correct. Yep, United States Senate from the state of Idaho.
I looked, you chose the Republican Party. Why that party? Is that the only place where an everyman candidate can succeed nowadays?
I don't know if it's the only place that an everyman can succeed, but I think that party more closely aligns with my values today. If you had asked me the same question, 60, 80 years ago, I'm pretty sure I would have fallen on the Democrat side of the aisle. And it's not that I've moved, per se, but as a lot of people have experienced, it's the parties have shifted dramatically. If we look back at, party platforms from, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, a lot of what Republicans believe today was actually, big chunks of it were on the Democratic Party platform 40 years ago. I can think of a presidential candidate who campaigned on the Democratic side of the aisle on, hey, we need, smaller government, lower taxes. We need to protect, American workers and restore American, blue collar workers. And it's like, oh, that's what the Republican Party today is saying, right? Is, hey, we need to protect American workers. We need to, honor and promote blue collar workers. We need to have smaller government. We need to have lower taxes. So that's kind of where, as a person of faith, that's where I'm at. Is life is sacred. People, even especially blue collar workers deserve, they deserve to be paid fair wages. They deserve to be appreciated for what they do with who they are. And I think those are important things, and I look at where we're at today. I mean, the healthcare industry has turned into how deeply can we gouge the American people and the American taxpayer and the American government, and how much money can we make off of their sicknesses? We're involved in all these, particularly in Idaho. The people here, they don't want to be involved in a bunch of foreign wars. They don't want to be changing regimes all over the world. They want prosperity for Americans, and they don't want to go play God all over the rest of the world. And so, unfortunately, that's not what our government's been doing. And I think we went back to having a good protective force, but not trying to change the world on the far side of the world. I think we could have a much smaller military and spend a lot less. And then on top of that, I mean, it's clear that there's a significant and substantial amount of waste going on in the military. Well, do you recall, or potentially you recall, a year ago we wanted to send some United States Marines from San Diego to Los Angeles to protect some federal facilities that were being damaged by looters and rioters. And here or there on whether that was the right approach, but they said, well, what's that going to cost? That's going to cost, $158 million. And everybody at the time was applauding, going, oh, yay, the Pentagon knows how much money they're spending. Good for them. But when you do the math, that's like $4,600 per Marine per day. And those, enlisted Marines make less than $100 a day. So where's all the money going?
Yeah, well, it's the big green machine, and I mean, it's such a huge bureaucracy that I'm not surprised if it's inefficient. But it is a bit of I don't know how we got to the war so quickly, but that's where I'm comfortable too. So let's go a little bit of war, and then we'll go to some more fun things. But I think it's a little bit of a cheap talking point, this like America first slogan, and that foreign wars are, hurting the American. I mean, in the long run, that might be true, especially when you have like 20 years wars that you lose in Afghanistan or Vietnam before that. But obviously, America also has interests that protect its citizens' interests. A big empire like America has to sometimes use some force abroad. I think it's maybe a bit reductive and simplified to say that all foreign wars are unnecessary.
Yeah, and I don't think the position is that all foreign wars are unnecessary. I think it's for example, why in America are we fomenting rebellion in Somalia, right?
Yeah.
If we look back at, one of the things people don't want to talk about is South America and Central America. A lot of the instability and problems that are driving people to try to immigrate to America, even illegally, well, a lot of those problems stem from failed interventions by America that ended up strengthening, bad people doing bad things, leading good people to want to run away to come to America, and then us saying, hey, sorry, you're not welcome here. Go away, right? So should we occasionally engage in a war? Like when I look back at World War II and I say, was that the right thing to do? I think so. But then I look at a lot of the other interventions we've had since then, and I go, man, I don't know that this was I don't know that that was the right thing to do. And then you have to look at the aspect of the foreign wars that we've engaged in are a large part of the national debt in America, which the national debt in America has gone from 11 trillion 20 years ago to almost 40 trillion now. And then what people don't also understand, generally speaking, is that the higher our national debt goes, that basically means printing money. The more money the government prints and puts into circulation, that has a direct correlation with the increase in prices that we all pay for things. And so
yes.
My people are very upset about the price of housing and the price of food and the price of fuel. And all of that is directly correlated to how much debt we have as a country, how much money we've printed and put into circulation as a country. And if we want that to stabilize, we have to stop printing money on demand and going further and further into debt.
Yeah, the inflation, of course, is a result of that printing, but I think it's getting out of hand when the American pastime baseball, if a beer costs $25, then something's gone wrong there.
I just was at a gas station in Moscow, Idaho, after a campaign event last Saturday, and they were selling bottles of Gatorade $2 for $9. $2 for $9.
That's too much.
Gatorade. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
For processed sugar, garbage, water, that's too much.
So, that's some of the stuff that these excessive foreign entanglements bring about for us is they've driven the prices of everything through the roof for everyday Americans. And frankly, we can't sustain that level of interventionism. And also, frankly, we're not very good at getting the results and the outcomes that we want from those interventions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would agree with you that if you take like sort of longer view of successful versus unsuccessful ones, it does seem that they definitely foreign interventions are difficult to win at, because I guess the nature is that the enemy is always fighting for their own homes and their own families in their backyard, so it's difficult to win. But I don't know. It also depends. Like, what is success? What if you take like a view 100 years from now? What if you take a view of like, okay, what if we didn't counter China and Russia and other powers that are against our interests abroad? What if we didn't counter them at all and did nothing? Was it better to go do something even if it short term looks like a loss and a majorly poor use of American lives and treasure? Do you see what my point? What if you take like 100-year view? Is it better that someone's fighting for quote unquote the good guys?
Well, I think that you're kind of presenting a false dichotomy, right? Because it's the dichotomy that you're putting out there is, should we go intervene abroad or should we do nothing? What if it was an alternative of, well, what if we do more intervention here at home? What if we actually stabilize family systems and education to where we're actually excelling here at home instead of just burning our money up in military conflicts around the world, right? What if we improve our own infrastructure and our own resource extraction and utilization to where we're not actually dependent on them for their success, for our success?
The current leadership of your party, though, are they happy with this kind of talk? Because is there like a split among Republicans on this particular issue?
I think when you have any organization, the establishment is always hesitant to accept or to welcome any change. And I think that's fair to say in this case as well, right? They would much rather have the current incumbent who will rubber stamp whatever they put in front of him and is clearly not a leader in the party and is clearly not a mover or shaker. He's just simply warming a seat. They'd much rather have that so they can continue with their agenda unopposed than have somebody new that's got different ideas of a better America than their ideas.
Yeah. What would you have done with this recent one then? What's your view on Iran and all that? What would you have done there?
Well, first off, I want to caveat that most of us don't have adequate facts and adequate information to have a well-informed opinion on the situation. Now, that said, I can look at that and say, a year ago, they told us we had to bomb their nuclear facilities in order to save the world. And then they bombed the nuclear facilities. They said, we've ended the threat. It's no longer a threat. Nothing's going on. Only to have a year later to have them say, well, we've got to go do it again. And this time, we're going to have to maybe even commit troops on the ground. Right? So I'm having a hard time as a citizen, reconciling those two positions, because it sounds very much like the whole weapons of mass destruction that got us involved in Iraq and then had us bogged down in Iraq for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, these WMD, there's a bit more evidence for it, seems like, at least. Again, as you said, we have the publicly available information is always a little bit iffy what to trust. But yeah, it seems that there definitely are pretty enriched uranium stuff that they have, the Iranians, but sure. I think I agree with you that they certainly lied last summer on both. I mean, Netanyahu lied to the Israeli people about Lebanon and said that Hezbollah has been set back years with that operation, and now there they are again, having to fight them again. And same with Iran. Yeah, it was Trump's words were like it was a spectacular success or something like that. One of his superlatives. Here we are again, having to do it again. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's again, I just, if you had asked any reasonable person who has a reasonable grasp of basic military strategy of, could you overthrow their regime and get the change you wanted simply with a naval interdiction? And I think we would say no, like that's not going to happen. And I've also read how basically the strategy that they're using to control the Straits of Hormuz and to basically stave off the American military might is actually a strategy that was developed by Americans in a internal war game run by our own military, right? So
how did they get their hands on that?
That's a good question. I think after a time they make the results of those exercises public, but I'm not positive on that.
Interesting. Yeah. Speaking of military and stuff, you were in the Marines for a while, right?
Very briefly. I thought that I wanted to go into the Marine Corps to get a little bit more discipline in my life. I had a very turbulent childhood. A lot of disruption, and I thought, okay, I need something to settle me down and to kind of help me learn to stay on the straight and narrow. So I joined the Marine Corps. I went to boot camp, was doing very well. And then about 5 weeks in, I ended up with a massive heat stroke, and I hit 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Went to the ER, nearly died in the ER. Spent 3 days in the ICU recovering, and they said, "Hey, look, we appreciate your efforts, but the Marine Corps is clearly not for you." So,
what were you wearing when you got the heat stroke? Do you remember?
I think we were just in our regular PT outfit. I don't think we were wearing any type of fatigues or anything like that. I think it was just, shorts and a t-shirt. It was late summer. It was August. I think I had eaten something that disagreed with me because I know I had spent a lot of time with a bowel issue prior to going on the run. But, when you're young, you're eager to please and to serve and to do things right. And I thought I would just, fight through it, and didn't realize how dehydrated I was. And then I went and finished the run, forced myself to finish the run. And, I was completely out of it. I was completely delirious by the end of it. I remember falling to the ground at the end of the run, and the battalion commander going, "Son, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm looking for my glasses, sir." And, I'm pawing on the ground looking for glasses. And he's like, "Son, your glasses are on your face. Get this man to the infirmary." It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. Yeah, but the reason I asked about clothes is it happened not with anyone near me, but in another unit when I was in the Army. Was when you start a lot of exercises, I mean, you would know, you start them early in the morning or late at night when it's freezing cold, no matter where you are in the world. And people would always put thermal layers and stuff. And then the exercise or the hike or whatever you're doing, it starts. And if you don't take that thermal layer off, then that's really dangerous. You should be pretty much going commando and wearing nothing for these things, even when it's cold.
Yeah, no, this was, wasn't an early morning. It was in the morning, but it wasn't too early. Yeah, I think it was just regular PTs. I've always looked at it as God saying, "Look, I didn't actually mean for you to be a Marine." So I very much believe that God has a personal interest in my life and in what I'm doing. And he's not afraid to give me nudges and pushes in directions when I'm not paying attention.
Well, what you're doing is pretty interesting, so I guess it's possible. What did you do after the Marines?
After the Marine Corps, I had to go get some stuff squared away from a financial standpoint. I kind of decided that okay, God, I've been running away. I had a sense that he wanted me to serve him at a different level, and I was running away. So I committed to go, pursuing that, but I had to go pay off some debt. So it took me a while to go pay off the debt. And then once I got that squared away, I actually ended up in a monastery over in France.
Why? Are there any monasteries in America, by the way, or is that more of a European thing?
No, there's some monasteries in America. The one that I chose in France was a particular group of monks that they spend a lot of their time studying and then a lot of their time preaching around the world. And I felt like that would be a good fit for who I was as a person. And so, I applied. They said yes. And so I flew over there and, got immersed in French and in learning French, and was really committed. It's there was a point early on where I thought, man, I just want to go home. This is tough. It's different. Everything's different. I mean, even the hinges on the doors are different and the door handles are different. Everything is different. I just want to go home. And I told myself, look, you're not going to go home until God tells you that's what he wants. And I said to God, God, I'm not leaving unless you tell me to leave. This is where I'm going to be, and I'm going to do what you want. And so we went through the whole process. I went through the novitiate process, and we got to the end of that, and I was, convinced that I was going to take vows and that I was supposed to take vows. And the novice master was like, actually, we've decided you should go home and have a family. Okay. All right. I guess I'll go do that then.
Wait, so how long were you in the monastery, and were there any special rules like silence or celibacy or all of it?
Yeah, all of that. So I was there almost 2 years, and yeah, you go over, they wanted me to really learn French, so they basically said, look, any of the times that you're allowed to talk, which was about an hour a day outside of class time, you can talk, but you can only talk in French. So that greatly accelerated my learning of French. And and then just the whole routine over there is, it's what you would, when you think monastery, you think, okay, they're getting up in the middle of the night to pray, and they're praying all throughout the day, and yeah, that's the deal. That's what we did. We would get up, we'd read the Bible, we'd pray, we'd come together as a community and sing psalms and pray, take pauses to go pray together as a community all throughout the day, at various times of the day. It's a vegetarian diet, so you're not eating meat in the monastery, but it's a very joyful life.
Every problem is minor. There's no life admin, right? As long as you every problem is sort of philosophical and major. Really, it's like you're spending your hours thinking and philosophizing and praying, but there's no admin. So that's kind of liberating, right?
Yeah, the material concerns are not things you have to worry about, right? Like somebody in the community is worrying about that. It's just not you, right? Your job is get up and pray well. Your job is to study and study well, as a novice. Your job is to, when it's time to go out on recreation in the afternoon and walk with the other brothers, to have a good conversation and to enjoy nature. I had the interesting experience of being a touch older than a lot of the novices, and having had a lot of experience driving by that time. And so I actually got a French driver's license, and ended up driving a lot for the community, driving people around to different places around the country. And that was a pretty interesting experience.
I mean, are these skills actually for what you're involved in now, running for office and getting involved in Washington and politics? I actually think those might be really good skills, like Marines combined with, or a short stint in the services combined with some monastery life. That doesn't sound bad for a politician, actually. But in society, so when you left the cloister, what did you actually know how to do?
So I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad's he was an iron worker since before I was born. And when I graduated high school, I thought, okay, I'm going to work as an iron worker for a little bit before I go to college. I did a little bit there. I ended up, landing there several times and actually becoming very proficient at it before I went to the monastery. And so when I came back from the monastery, their response was, well, look, just go back to working construction and, raise a family. So I'm a very skilled craftsman in my own right. But then we had an opportunity to start a business, my father and I. And so we started a business, and it's been incredibly successful. We're engaged in contract. We have a license in most of the western states in the United States, and we do a lot of commerce across state lines, interfacing with some of the biggest companies in the country. So that's given me a ton of experience of, what does it mean to be a national level business? How do you deal with, multi-million-dollar budgets, and how do you deal with labor laws from one state to another? Those are types of experiences that most candidates never get.
Yes, but what I'm going to ask now, though, since you've built a company from scratch, and an incredibly successful blue-collar company, you must have been making deals this whole time. How do you view personally, like, the current political leadership and their deal-making skills, considering what we talked about, interventions and whatnot?
For me, it's different because coming as a subcontractor, you're always coming in as the person with less power into a negotiation. And so you, as a subcontractor, you have to decide what's important, what's a deal breaker and, what's going to trigger you to walk away. For example, I think a lot of the bully tactics that are used, they can be effective, but they don't, in the long run, they're not successful and they don't earn respect, right? Because they tend to not foster a mutual respect. They tend to say, I'm powerful and you're not, and if you don't like it, then screw you. And that's not the school of deal making that I was raised on, right? I very much come from a Stephen Covey perspective of this needs to be a win-win or there can be no deal. And it's okay for us to say, no, we're not having a deal. But if we are going to have a deal, we're going to have a deal where both sides win. And I think that's a much healthier place to negotiate from and to navigate from. Like if I have an overarching life philosophy at this point, it really comes down to, as an individual, I have to love God with my whole heart and soul. And then he said, look, the second commandment's like the first of, you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, you got to learn to love yourself and treat yourself correctly and with respect, and then treat others the same way. And if as a society we forgot how to truly love ourselves, and true love of self isn't self-indulgence, and it isn't excusing your faults, it isn't excusing bad behavior. It's approaching those things with an eye to how do I correct and how do I have compassion for the weaknesses. And when we look at how do we deal with other people, why would we not want to treat them with respect and go, we want to have a win for you and have a win for us? And generally that doesn't come from a power dynamic where one side's bullying the other.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I think we did discuss that actually with another guest a little bit, the bully stuff, and sometimes it's unfair how it's always that the stronger party is viewed as the bully, but what you say makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, America is coming into these things from a position of power, and they are going to use it, right? And especially the current administration seems to like using it.
Here's where I think if people wanted to double check this, right, is like we would all like other countries to love America. And are we dealing with those countries in a way that they will respect us and like us? Or are we dealing with them in a way that we might get what we want now, but in the long term, we're fostering a deep level of resentment. And in some cultures, we're fostering a level of fundamentalism that's going to come back and hurt us later on. I think we need to be very aware of that and be very honest with ourselves about that.
I started this by calling you an everyman candidate. There is another word, the nasty one. I didn't want to start it on the wrong foot, but the other P word, populist. By definition, if someone like you, who is not a career politician and a little bit different in both maybe appearance and background and so forth, you're not like a wasp from Martha's Vineyard or something. You're not a Kennedy either. So how do you avoid the trap? Because by definition, the moment populist parties or candidates gain actual power and they get in order to stay in, they become the establishment. And then you just got the next populist who's trying to oust you by being even more everyman and saying that you sold out. So how do you avoid that?
I think it's accepting that you're not going to be a career politician. And that making some of the hard choices might mean that you don't get reelected, and being okay with that. If I'm successful in the healthcare side, for example, the healthcare industrial complex would have a lot of incentive to fund a candidate to run against me. And they may be successful enough in that I lose. But if I affect really positive long-term change for the country, that will have been worth it. And if I turn around and I accept a bunch of money from the that industrial complex, well then people should call me out for selling out.
Yep. Do you have like a good example of an everyman or populist candidate, either back home or in Europe, who would have not sold out and sort of kept things where they promised they would keep things?
I think Rand Paul does a good job of trying to represent everyday Americans. And he takes a lot of heat and a lot of abuse for some of his stands. I respect that. I respect that a lot. Again, I know he's not Republican, so, some of my Republican peers might be angry, but I look at, President Kennedy, and I think he took some stands that ended up getting him killed, but they were the right stands to take.
Yeah. No Bernie Sanders then.
No, I can't say that I'm a Bernie Sanders fan.
That's fair. Yeah. So, healthcare-wise, what are we doing first? Obviously, this is a forever conversation, but give us a couple of bullet points.
Radical transparency, and then we need to be a lot closer to our peer countries of how much of every healthcare dollar goes to frontline workers compared to overhead and profits. According to a Wall Street Journal report a week or two ago, in peer countries, it's 75 cents on the dollar goes to frontline healthcare workers and 25 cents goes to overhead. In America, it's 9% goes to frontline healthcare workers and 91% goes to overheads and profits.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot. So I get it. We have a lot of healthcare protections and rules, but at a certain point, somebody has to draw the line and say, enough is enough. It's not okay to abuse people in their illnesses like that. And it's not okay to abuse the government and the taxpayer by charging those types of prices. It's not okay.
And the recent, but what did they just come out with? Was it psychedelics, and they're gonna open up research into that? What's your stance on those things, considering your Christian background?
I have several friends who have used microdoses of psychedelics to work on some healthcare issues. They have reported rapid and very good results. I've also had it explained as, from some Christian friends of mine, that it's an attempt to have a spiritual encounter without the time and patience to have an authentic spiritual encounter. So I think there is some good that can be done by exploring that avenue of treatment. Because the reality is that we've gotten ourselves into a place where there's a lot of mental health issues from a lot of generational trauma, from a lot of divorce, a lot of broken families. This should anger every good-hearted person. In America, 1 in 3 women will be sexually abused in their lifetime, and 1 in 10 men will be sexually abused in their lifetime, right? And that leaves damage, and that carries over. And so if using, medically administered psychedelics can help people to start healing to where they can stop passing on the pain and stop hurting other people, then that's probably a net benefit. Whereas a Christian, it gets challenging is, using psychedelics to escape, using drugs to escape, using alcohol to escape. That's where the problems come in, right? Is that we have issues and pain. And rather than getting to the root causes and trying to heal, if we're just running away and escaping, that's a very unhealthy pattern.
Yeah. First of all, that I didn't know that 1 in 3 women, that's a crazy figure. I had no idea. But that made me think, so you seem to have a really balanced view on issues, and you're not trying to run a party program through us here. So a more general question, this might be difficult. What do you think about where the public discourse on all these issues is? I feel like the internet, X, all these apps are just toxic places, and on every issue people get so angry and all seems so polarized. Is it different where you're at in Idaho, Montana, those places? Are people still just happily friendly and they know their neighbors and they say howdy and all that? Or is it the same, polarized, angry?
I wish it was the case that people were happy and howdy, but people are polarized and they're angry. And if you notice, I prefaced my conversation around the Iran conflict with I don't have all of the facts statement. I don't have all of the information statement. And reminding myself and the listener of that is a way to say, look, I'm open to new information. I'm humble enough to know that I don't have all the facts. Therefore, I shouldn't have a strong, adamant opinion because there's so much I don't know. And unfortunately, we would think that with the internet, it would be easier to get more information and get closer to the truth. But I think what many of us have found is that it's just as easy to get deeply off track as it is to get to the truth. Or it might be maybe even easier to get information that's taking us away from the truth than it is to get to the truth. And that's where I think it's important to remember that, like, we have a responsibility to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Particularly as a Christian, like that's what we're called to do. It's not just love your neighbor; it's love your neighbor as you love yourself. And none of us love being attacked online or being, having our opinions misrepresented. None of us really like that toxic rhetoric. In fact, I did a book tour with my book, and the number one thing people said they wanted changed at the national level was they're tired of the toxic rhetoric leading to nothing getting done. People are really sick of this unhealthy dialogue. They really are deeply sick of it.
That's what sells clicks. That's what gets the short-term dopamines firing in the brain, and that's what they all prey on.
Prey is a good word. Prey is a very good way of looking at it, because I've heard people say, look, we shouldn't tackle these problems because it'll wreck the economy and I think, okay, but what part, right? Do you mean it'll mean like less clicks and so less money for Facebook, which means that, Mark Zuckerberg will have to, buy a $100,000 watch instead of a $10 million watch? I'm probably okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
No, that's true.
Does that mean that somebody won't be able to come in from out of state and pay 5 times what the going rate is for a house? I'm okay with that.
Do you think your background being so different, do you think it's an actual advantage in anything, like trying to change the healthcare system? These are big, slow-moving, bureaucratic nightmares to deal with. Do you think you have any kind of edge, or is it the opposite? You're going to be on a steep learning curve?
I think it's a both and. I think it gives me an edge because I actually can see the problem because I'm looking at it from such a different point of view. And I recognize that there will be a steep learning curve in order to affect the change that I would like to affect.
Yeah. Do you mind if I throw you a real curveball here?
I don't mind at all.
I had just recently read a big 600-page book on Native American history. Don't ask me why. I'm not even American. But it's fascinating. And you're from up there, yonder in the mountains, Idaho, Montana. What do you feel like Native communities up there now? What are the main issues facing them? And what are you going to do about it?
I have a few friends from those communities. One of the things they brought to my attention was how those communities are actually targets for predators. And because of the interesting nature between them as sovereign nations, but still inside the United States, they're very underrepresented when it comes to federal law enforcement and local law enforcement. And that makes me deeply sad, right? We're talking about, these young men and women being prey to the worst kinds of predators in our country and being abused, and then there being little to no chance of catching the bad guy. And that leaves real scars on these communities, deep scars on these communities, and that's very problematic. I think there's an issue too around most of the tribes have found a way to keep money flowing into their local economies by having casinos. And while I'm happy that they've been able to bring money into their communities through casinos, it also brings an element of, a less desirable element into their communities, which is causing harm. Another area that we see them really struggling is they've become targets for the cartels. And you would think that this was just a southern, southwestern American problem. It's not. The cartels have actually even started infiltrating tribal areas on the northern border as well. There's some real problems. And I'm not sure how it gets addressed, right? They have their very, unique and distinct identities, and their sovereignty is very important to them. And yet at the same time, that sovereignty and individuality is perpetuating or making it more difficult to help them with some of these problems that are really ugly problems.
Yeah, and local law enforcement and otherwise don't have jurisdiction on Indian lands, right? That's
correct.
Those ancient treaties, most of them were broken, if not all of them. But in a long list of treaties that never worked out well for them is that now they're pretty remote from where power is and where decisions are made, yet the people who make decisions that should affect them directly, it's only Washington and the federal government, right?
They do have some level of cooperation with state and local governments, but yeah, all the major decisions have to run through the federal government. And there's still a lot of enmity between a lot of the politicians, including my opponent and the Native American communities. That is a conundrum. You're right.
Well, generally, very sad for them. I guess, I don't know. I had this thought reading all that about their history, that it was all terrible, terrible events piled up on one after the other. But then also what is always forgotten is that if it weren't the Americans, it would have been the Russian Empire or the Spanish Empire or the British one. And then you would have been like living in a backwater of Siberia or something, and I don't think the federal decision makers there would have cared any better for you. So there's, I guess, some kind of silver lining there in still being in America.
Yeah, I could see that. It's if you step again up to that 30,000-foot view and you go, there have been many communities, many cultures around the world who have been rolled into other countries, rolled into other cultures. And I think it's noble that, the Native communities have tried to hold on to some of their culture and preserve what they can of their unique identity. And the challenge is integrating that into how do we survive in a modern economy. And I would be very welcome and open to more conversation with them around how do we help with that.
Yeah. What about the rest of the Idaho population? So healthcare, these scam prices that they pay for medicines and all of this, you're saying that's a big priority for you. What's a uniquely Idaho issue that, we have listeners all over the place. Let's go exotic. What's unique in Idaho? What's a problem there now?
A couple of things. One that a lot of people may not be familiar with is, if we took a steamroller to Idaho and we flattened it out similar to Texas, it would actually be larger than Texas. However, 60% of Idaho's land is federally owned and 20% is state owned. So that creates some really interesting funding questions, right? If you can imagine Texas being mostly federally owned, that'd be a lot of land. But right now, Texas has less than 2% as federal or state land of its whole landmass, whereas Idaho has almost 80% federally and state controlled. So there's a few programs at the federal level that are designed to help make up for that fact that the federal government has kind of kept, a hold of the federal lands. One of them is the payment in lieu of taxes, right? So in a state where all the land is privately held, all of the land contributes to the tax base. In Idaho, only 40% contributes to the tax base. And in some counties, it's only 3%. I was in Custer County, Idaho, about 10 days ago, and 97% of Custer County is federally owned. So that means their entire county budget is only on 3% of their land, and yet they have to provide services to the entire county. So this PILT program, or payment in lieu of taxes, the payment in lieu of taxes program from the federal government is supposed to help counties recover some money from the lands that they're not allowed to tax. And, there's a lot of states who look at states like Idaho and go, you're just getting a handout from the government. And at the same time, here in Idaho, we're looking at it and going, well, if you're going to control the land and not allow us to use it and not allow us to make any money from it to support our local governments, you have to contribute something to the local economy so that we can continue to provide services. So that's a program that needs some more attention, needs some help that a lot of people around the country and around the world wouldn't be aware of.
Yeah. Wow. Custer County, named after George Armstrong Custer as well. There we go. Back to the Native American history there. Yeah. Hey, cool. So in Idaho, though, what you're saying is basically if you flatten it out, it's bigger than Texas, so big old mountains. But nobody lives up in the mountains, right?
Some people do. But yeah, you're right. It's, the population centers are mostly in the valleys. You've got a very large population center on we call it the Snake River Plain, or Snake River Plateau. That runs from basically Jackson, roughly. The Snake River comes out of the Tetons, I believe, and goes through St. Anthony and then winds its way across southern Idaho. And then it ends up at the Oregon border going through Hell's Canyon, which Hell's Canyon is actually 50% deeper than the Grand Canyon. And then there's a kind of a corridor, north-south corridor that's a long 2-lane highway that takes you up into the panhandle of Idaho. And you've got a couple of valley areas there that are fairly well populated. But yeah, it's largely mountains with very small communities. And those small communities also have issues, right? They don't have healthcare facilities. There's some towns where if you want to go to a doctor or you want to go to a hospital, it's 3 to 4 hours away to get somewhere where you can get medical treatment.
Jesus, yeah. It's a rough life. I'm going to guess, talking about mountain people, I'm going to guess that you're going to be pro-guns if you had to pick a side in that argument.
Yes, we are very pro-gun. Idaho is very much a pro-Second Amendment state. So we have constitutional carry. We even have constitutional concealed carry in Idaho. So we believe that, an armed society tends to be a very polite society.
Yeah. That's something that, obviously for the aggregators on the internet, that it would be great to talk about guns, but that's not how we operate here. My only worry is that in America there's a lot of dum-dums who don't know how to use guns, who walk around with them or aren't trained in gun safety. And maybe not so much in Idaho because it's, hunting and all that is so much of a way of life, I imagine.
Yeah, and again, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to restrict guns. And I think there are other alternative ways that could also solve the problem, right? Like, for example, what if we said, hey, we're going to have mandatory gun education, right? We're going to help you understand how a gun works and how to shoot a gun and how to store a gun. And that's, part of your high school education. And I'm not saying that would work, but it's an idea, right? And I think that's when you start with the answer and then you start asking questions back from the answer, you don't get anywhere, right? But when you start when you start asking questions and you start exploring and being open to where it might lead you, you can actually get to a lot of different places.
Yeah, I'm happy you said high school because otherwise this made me think of that Sacha Baron Cohen show, This Is America, where he does preschool gun education.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. Hey, you have 6 kids, is that right? Is that the right number?
6. You have 6 sons.
Maybe this is something we can definitely agree on. Is what's your view on this? Why aren't people breeding anymore? Europe, America, whatever, Western world, educated people with careers and stuff. Nobody has kids anymore. I have 1 kid, just letting you know that for now. But I meet friends, and it's like rare to have the one, and we're in our mid-30s, and most people have none.
I think it's a values question. If you believe the idea that our value comes from consuming and possessing things, then you'll organize your life around how do I possess things and use and consume things. If you believe that your value comes from God and from my worldview of doing what he would like you to do, of being open to his design rather than trying to be your own God, then you can open yourself to different things. For example, most of us would agree that doing an act of service to someone is incredibly rewarding. Having children is a life of service. But I think there's also another component that's a little harder to talk about, and that's how many people in my generation and your generation grew up in broken families, grew up in very turbulent, disordered childhoods through no fault of their own, and are thinking, I don't want that for my kids. I don't want to bring kids into this mess. I don't want them to suffer what I suffered. And it's a very understandable sentiment and feeling, but the flip side is, man, I can't think of anything more rewarding here below, than having my children and giving back to my children and seeing my sons grow into strong, fine men who are dramatically better than me. My son's at 22, those are my oldest, and they are such better men than I was at 22. I mean, they are markedly better men than I was. And, man, I wouldn't trade that for all the money in the world.
Yes. One of the big names in your party currently called them childless cat ladies. And I think that was quite a sharp way of formulating it, to say the least. But I can see what he meant with that, though. I think there is what you're saying about turbulent childhoods and all that, and it's nobody's fault. But there is also this other sort of attitude of people have become very obsessed with themselves and like how they feel about things, and everything should be so tailored, and I don't know. I guess coddling of the mind and the person is, now I sound like I'm in your party, that I'm very right wing. I'm not. I'm just saying I can see the point. There is also maybe a generation of people that are a bit self-obsessed, and having children is about giving to someone else and sort of putting yourself in the background.
To a point, yeah. And I think look at it this way too. When I'm 75, no one's going to care that I had a construction career. And I'm not going to care that I had a construction career. But I'm going to look back at my kids and I'm going to be either very proud or very, sad that I didn't do the things I ought to have done. But more than anything, I'm probably going to be very proud and full of love. And maybe they're going to have kids. And I'll love those kids. And it'll be an incredibly fulfilling end time of life. But if I were to prioritize my construction career and a political career at the expense of having children, and then I get to that 75, 80-year-old and I don't have anything like that to look back at, I think it's a little bit of an empty thing to look back at. Yes, you may have helped a bunch of people, but will it be the same as looking back at children and grandchildren? Right? And it's a different concept of wealth, right?
Yes. What really matters in life, yeah. Speaking of things we love and what really matters in life, I have a question here from my co-host Sylvia, who you haven't met. Do you like dogs?
I do like dogs.
Oh yeah.
We don't have a dog at the moment.
Can't trust the person. Yeah. Can't trust the person who doesn't.
And yeah, we had a border collie for 14 years, and we had to put him down a few years back, and life's goings on haven't allowed us to get another dog, but we also have cats. We have a couple of tuxedo silkies, and those keep life spicy.
Well, now you ruined it. Now that's a politician's answer, is that you have both. Come on. Dogs or cats? Gun to your head.
If I had to pick one, I'd pick dog. I'm definitely a dog person at heart.
Fair enough. All right. Okay. Me too. We have both as well. It's a constant balance of power. It's like the Soviet Union and the USA.
That's very funny.
we have the Cuban Missile Crisis playing out here every day. Hey, I have one more big question, a difficult one. Then I promise we can finish with something fun. The opioid crisis. So is fentanyl in Idaho, and what are we going to do about all that?
I'm a fan of the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. And he would say, don't ask what's the problem, ask what's the pain. What's the pain that all these folks are trying to get away from? Because nobody that has an addiction wants to have an addiction. They don't want to be there. They don't want to be in squalor. They don't want to be despised. But they've got some serious pain that no one wants to hear about, that they don't want to look at. And so they would rather endure that addiction than face the pain, look at the pain. And I think that's a cultural issue, right? Like we have created places and situations for a lot of people to have pain. We've normalized the broken family. We've normalized and allowed and tolerated the sexual abuse crisis to go on. And those things cause tremendous amounts of psychological and emotional pain. And until we're willing to face those underlying problems, I'm afraid we're gonna continue having a lot of addiction problems, whether it's fentanyl, opioids, alcohol. It's the underlying deeper problems that have to be addressed, and those are cultural and cultural level problems. Unfortunately, government has a role in it, but government's not it's not the solution. It's not the end all be all, right? It's a bigger problem.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a tough, complex totality of factors that leads to this stuff. For some people, it's just surgery, and then it's a spiral down from there. And then for others, it's all mental, and it's much harder to even know what the cause is. They might not know themselves after years of addiction why it started.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, in my own journey, there was a lot of stuff that I refused to look at because it's painful, and I didn't want to look at the pain. I didn't want to rip the Band-Aid off. And it was only in ripping the Band-Aid off and actually looking at it and dealing it with a certain level of tenderness and acceptance that things have gotten better in my life.
It's been widely reported that after his most recent DUI and accident, Tiger Woods called the president. Do you think he would have been better off calling you?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Hey, Denny, you seem like a great guy with a sense of humor. This is not what I expected from our first candidate on the campaign trail to appear on the show. I do have a question, though. I read somewhere that you're into lacrosse and sailing. Is that just to have something to talk about at parties in Washington with all those wasps from Connecticut?
Oh, not at all. The school that my boys go to introduced lacrosse after COVID, and one of my friends was coaching, and it looked like he needed help, so I volunteered to help and picked up the game of lacrosse, and now all 6 of my sons have played lacrosse, and I'm guilty of watching lacrosse highlight reels and games on YouTube. So I'm kind of loving the game. And then sailing, during COVID, we picked up sailing. So I have this little tiny Hobie Getaway catamaran that's it's fun to get out with the kids on the local lake. It's inexpensive, and it's a lot of fun. So
cool. Yeah, no, seems like a cool game. You have any picks for us in the pro game? When does pro lacrosse even start? When do they play?
All summer. So the Division I tournament wraps up. It wraps up on Memorial Day weekend, and I think pro lacrosse kicks off a week or two later and runs through the summer.
I'll have to watch some. Hey, to give us a serious message for the end here.
Okay.
From monasteries, you're a man of God, 6 kids, a successful businessman. What should we all keep in mind, going into this election cycle that you're participating in and all the wars of the world? Do you have a grounding message for us?
I would say we need to choose someone who is willing to fight for our kids and our grandkids and to fight for our future as a country. There was a time and a place where we could get by with sending a rubber stamp back to Washington, but that time has come and gone. And now it's time to send somebody who has a track record of success and a track record of living in the real world and meeting real world responsibilities and it's time to vote for change in Idaho.
All right. Hey, Denny LaVe, fascinating person. Really happy to have met you, and we'll put all the links to your memoir and the links to your website and everything in the description. And everyone, remember to follow and share this show as well. And we look forward to seeing you succeed in the elections. You seem like a great guy.
I appreciate it.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode of The Talking Ass, remember to rate, review, follow the show for more of this weirdness, and share it with a friend, enemy, neighbor, relative, lover even. And press those goddamn internet buttons. Press them hard. Follow, all that jazz. See you next time.